Welcome back. I'm Cole Coffin, and in this video, we're going to take a deep dive into some Reddit posts I found. If content like this is something you find interesting, then consider subscribing and turn on post notifications so that you can be alerted when a new video is uploaded. Now that that's out the way, let's dive in. Our first post was uploaded onto the RBI sub on July 20th of 2021, and it was titled, "Police didn't investigate, and it's been bothering me." At around 8:30 to 8:45, I arrived home from a quick trip to town to grab a beer. As I got out of my car, I could hear something. I thought for a moment that I had left the TV on and was hearing it from outside, but as I walked to the front of my car and pressed the lock button on my remote, I realized that what I was hearing was screaming. I listened for a second, thinking it was somebody screwing around, but then the woman's voice screamed, "No, stop, you're hurting me, you're killing me," and an adult male voice yelling something I couldn't make out. There was a dog barking from the same direction, as well as a repeated thudding noise. I immediately dialed 911 and told the police. They could even hear the screaming in the background. They said they'd send an officer to drive by, but an hour passed and none came. I watched for them on my security cameras. I pulled the footage from the only one that was set to record constantly. The camera on my back door only records when it detects a humanoid shape, so it caught me making the phone call and a little of the screaming in the background. The backyard camera caught it all, but it's unintelligible due to the outdoor AC unit noise. I cleaned up the audio as best I could, but I need advice on how to proceed. I'm attaching a Dropbox link to the video. I also included the original in the second half of the video. If you watch it, the screaming was coming from directly where the camera is pointed, but more than 50 feet away across a narrow field. There is a small shack that has a couple of cars usually parked at the road, just on the other side of the field. It is bothering me a lot since I'm 41 years old, and I've never heard anything so disturbing in real life. Here's the video. As stated in the post, the OP also provided this video. Now I will warn you that while it does not contain anything visually graphic, it does contain the audio of the woman screaming. And because of this, I understand that some viewers might find this disturbing, so I've provided a timestamp for you to skip ahead. Here's the video now.
Out at Rocky Fork Lake. I'm not real sure the address. I'm at my home.
For those of you that skipped ahead, the original video is pretty noisy, but in the background you can clearly hear the distressed screams of a woman. A small section of the video also includes where the OP is on the phone with 911. That's frustrating to think that the police won't even come to check it out. Maybe call and ask for a report/file number to see what they say. Do you know anyone who has a hobby drone? It might be worth checking it out from above, early in the morning or late in the evening. I have a $1,000 DJ-1 4K drone. I thought about it, but it's all buried in trees, so I don't know how good it would do. But it is worth a shot. I could always take it up 200 feet and then come down slowly if I don't see anybody about. I guess I should probably know the way of the land around here anyway. The OP would also give us an update the following day, after finishing speaking to the police about what he had heard the night before. I talked to them and they wrote down what I said. I showed them the video, they have copies of it, and said they would do a welfare check. They also told me to drop it and not trespass or I would be cited. They said they will handle anything, so I guess I'm just going to have to watch the newspapers and see if anything comes up. That's all I can do. I've done my due diligence, and I really hope everything is actually alright. It is weird that the police use the term drop it when telling the OP to stay away, but this is likely because they don't want anybody to go near the crime scene and potentially contaminate it, which could jeopardize any investigation going on. And after a whole year of waiting, the OP would come back to leave an update comment under the original post. September 7th. I guess they finally had a reason to go out and check the property I was trying to tell them to look at. There are sheriff cars all over the place, and cops in gloves walking in and out of this garage, and even one cop throwing up in the front yard. I have a picture, but I can't add it to an update. This comment was followed by a separate post not long after. Welp, murder it is. I posted last year about coming home and hearing a female voice screaming for her life. I posted a video with the audio of the scream and got plenty of comments. About 2 months later, the house that it was coming from had sheriff cars all around it. I found out that an elderly man had taken his own life and that his son was the only person home and the person who had reported that his father had shot himself. Fast forward to last week, I was sitting at home watching YouTube when I heard gunshots. I live in the country and that's common, so I didn't think anything of it. Turns out, it was the sound of that son taking his mother's life. He's trying to claim self-defense, but he's being charged with murder. I live next door and my security cameras caught the audio of the murder. It also captures the vehicle that the son made the getaway in. I've had detectives in and out gathering video footage for the past week. This is a family annihilator. They are now looking at him for the murder of his father as well. The case has been reopened, and if they had recognized that my calls and reports were actually real, 2 lives could have been saved. I'm going to link the story. Also, wouldn't Tim Johnson II be Tim Johnson Jr.? The OP also provided a link to this news article. A Highland County man is accused of shooting his mother to death in Paint Township. In a press release, Highland County Sheriff's Office said the police received a call from a man who claimed his mother shot herself on Saturday at around 8 p.m. When deputies arrived at the home on Hickory Trail, they discovered the body of 61-year-old Stephanie Cheney. Investigators said her son, 40-year-old Tim Johnson II, admitted to shooting his mother when he was questioned about the incident. Johnson is charged with murder. His preliminary hearing is scheduled for February 8th at 9:30 a.m. in the Hillsborough Municipal Court. This is where I began to investigate this incident a bit further myself. I found more articles talking about these events, and I noticed something that confused me a bit about the OP's original post. I couldn't find any information about Tim taking his father's life. In fact, I found an obituary stating that Stephanie was preceded in death by her first husband, Tim Johnson. This information was probably misconstrued among the local residents while everybody was waiting to try to figure out what was going on. The OP's original post was uploaded on the 20th of July of 2021. The footage of the screaming was recorded on July 2nd of 2021. Fast forward, the news articles state that the incident with Tim and his mother took place on January 29th of 2022 at around 8 p.m. I think that the OP stumbled upon something that was brewing up in Tim's household for quite some time, and had the police done more when the OP originally contacted them 7 months before Tim took his mother's life, this incident could have maybe been avoided. Tim was eventually sentenced 15 years to life in prison for this crime. I couldn't find any information about him getting the possibility of parole, but I really doubt that he's eligible. Hopefully Tim is never allowed to walk free again. And while we can't bring Stephanie back, hopefully his family can finally get some peace, knowing that Tim is behind bars. This next post was uploaded on February 26th of 2021 by the Reddit user Bjorn Secular, where they detail their disturbing experience dealing with a person that their husband used to work with. The post goes like this. A former coworker is using burner numbers to harass my husband and acting obsessive. I know this is long, but I really appreciate anyone who takes the time to read this. In late November of last year, my husband Paul was tasked with training a new hire named Frank, who was brought in from outside the company. Paul does not usually lead training. However, Frank's supervisor was overwhelmed during the last quarter. Frank worked at Paul's office for a little over a month. Frank seemed friendly at first, albeit an excessive texter. Even Paul's boss complained that they received social messages from Frank during non-work hours. Sometimes Frank's messages would be incoherent and needier if he didn't receive an immediate reply, followed by multiple question marks. My husband addressed this with Frank during his training, and for the most part, the messages became infrequent. But after Frank was placed at his branch, the messages subsided. In early January, Paul's boss asked if he could discuss a work matter with Frank because his director was on vacation. Later that day, Frank sent Paul a message that said, "Babe." Paul thought perhaps Frank had accidentally texted the wrong person, so Paul didn't respond. Frank sent more messages regarding work, and when Paul didn't immediately reply, Frank made an explicitly suggestive comment. Paul responded, "Stop making things weird," and Frank apologized, but then added, "You're hot though." My husband told him, "You need to stop. This is not a line I want to cross with you." Frank then said something along the lines of, he was available if Paul wanted him. Paul said, "I'm a happily married man," to which Frank replied, "That's what all men say." Paul again told Frank to stop. I had previously met Frank when I visited my husband's office. Paul had pictures of me on his desk. His sexual orientation and marital status were not ambiguous when Frank sent those messages. Paul told me what happened as soon as he arrived from work. He said that he would screenshot the message and report them to HR. However, Paul felt so uncomfortable with the messages that he deleted them. Paul assumed Frank was drunk and once clear of mind, he would be embarrassed and forget that it happened. Over the next few days, Paul received between 2 to 3 messages daily from Frank that were about work. However, towards the end of the week, Frank became apologetic and told Paul that he had hoped they could still be friends. Paul has only briefly known this person, has never hung out with him outside of the office, nor has he engaged in social texts. Paul has also not answered any of Frank's messages since the first time he told him to stop. A couple of things occurred to me over the next week. A week after Frank was placed at his new branch, Paul received messages from an iCloud account. They said, "Hey sexy," and when Paul didn't reply, they were followed by question marks. Paul immediately blocked the account, assuming it was a scammer. In the last few months, Paul received frequent texts from unknown numbers with local area codes that addressed him by name. Paul thought they were all robo-scams. I realized that this started around the time that Frank began his training. When I visited my husband's office, Frank barely acknowledged me when we were introduced. That night I joked with my husband that during my visit, Frank was like a shadow and seemed to appear every time I turned around. After a week of unanswered texts, Frank again apologized and asked if Paul would call him. He had called Paul's office earlier to see if he was there. Subsequently, Paul contacted his assistant manager/coworkers and asked them not to share a schedule with anyone who calls. Frank messaged that he would stop texting and was sorry if he bothered Paul, but later in the night, Paul started to receive messages from an unknown number with a local area code. The first message said, "Hey, remember me? I *67 the number from my phone to see if it was a computer or an actual phone line, and when I called, it rang twice and then went to voicemail." The person never stated their name, and their texts were incoherent. The texter asked, "Are you trying to end my career?" They claimed to be a former employee and said that they had previously dated Paul. "We've been together for 2 decades, and I'm the only person Paul has ever dated." The messages continuously baited Paul to call the number and find out who was texting him. Finally, they said, "You used to be sweet." Paul didn't block the number immediately because he wanted to see if this person would incriminate themselves. Paul received over 20 messages throughout the night. He never responded to any of them, and the number is now blocked. He paid a small fee to look up the number and found that it belongs to Envoy. The person used a VoIP to text. For those of you that are unaware, VoIP stands for Voice over Internet Protocol. Its definition is a technology that allows you to make voice calls using broadband internet connections instead of a regular phone line. Basically, that means that instead of using a regular phone to contact the OP's husband, this texter is contacting Paul through a computer instead, likely as an effort to hide their personal phone number, as well as their identity. Paul tried to look up a VoIP registry online. Paul also reported the anonymous number to the Federal Trade Commission with the text logs. He took screenshots of all the undeleted messages between him and Frank and the anonymous number. Paul also called local law enforcement. He knew they wouldn't be able to do anything because no direct threat was made, and they told him to keep the number blocked. Paul also paid a service to retrieve the text he deleted that came directly from Frank's number, but it was unsuccessful. iCloud backup was not activated. The next week at work, one of Paul's assistant managers approached him. They follow Frank on Facebook and were alarmed by his post. The day after Paul received a text from an unknown number, Frank made similar posts online and added, "With me, you're either ride or die, or dead." Paul compiled all the information he had and shared it with his boss and company HR. Over the next few weeks, Paul continued to receive texts from Frank, sometimes once a week or once every other week. After a month-long investigation, HR touched base that their legal department had found several red flags. However, they can't disclose the info because of confidentiality, nor were they going to fire Frank. Paul has been away on business for the past 2 weeks and I've been home alone. Paul told me he received texts from Frank that asked how his business trip was going. Just to reiterate, Paul hasn't responded to Frank's messages since he told him to stop, which was over a month ago. Last night I saw I had several missed calls from Paul around midnight, and when I called him back, I could tell he was worried. Same as before, he had started to receive texts from a number with a local area code. They said, "I miss you. Why do you hate me?" The number called him consecutively for an hour. Paul had to put his phone into Do Not Disturb. The following text messages he received were very explicit, and some referenced me. "For the most part, I feel safe at home. We have a PO box and an unlisted street address. There are exterior and interior cameras at all entry points around our home. Also, our neighborhood has 24-hour security. However, I am worried sick every time Paul leaves the house. We've wanted to start a family for a long time, but have struggled with infertility. Unfortunately, this past month, I suffered another miscarriage. This person has added unnecessary stress to our lives. Last night I was shaking and couldn't sleep. Any advice on how to handle where the texts are coming from, or how to handle harassment would be much appreciated. Paul and I already discussed going to the police once he returns." A lot of commenters expressed their concern for the OP, and one user on a now deleted account would comment this: "This won't help with tracking the number down, but I suggest putting everything together in an email to HR and sending a copy to yourself so that you have a record. I would start it out with, as I reported to you on, and the date. I would also have a paper trail in case the company decides to turn on the wrong person. He needs to leave and needs to fight for unemployment, or you someday need to take legal action. That sounds extremely disturbing. I hope that someone is able to help you catch this guy. Another user by the name Perky Hedgewig would also comment and even got a response back from the OP. It sounds like Paul and his boss need to go back to HR and let them know their lack of action is unacceptable and is creating a toxic work environment. This is beyond just being not okay. He has been forwarding every message to HR, but has not heard back from them in over 2 weeks. To his knowledge, he does not think the company has addressed the situation with Frank after the first complaint was filed. Later on, the OP did come back to the post with an edit on how the situation was developing with the HR department. Edit, more info. We were definitely frustrated with HR's response. My husband was told legal would review all of the information he shared. He spoke to them on the phone several times, hour-long conversations. They asked if he felt safe and he said frankly no. Things escalated in such a short period. They took certain precautions, i.e., he's never in the building alone, he didn't work past sunset, he parked towards the front, and security made sure cameras are facing the parking lot. They seemed supportive at first. However, the investigation took over a month and they told my husband there wasn't enough to fire Frank. The HR rep did say that she was surprised by legal resources. She didn't realize how much they have access to, and that they found several red flags, but they were unable to share what they found, or when/if Frank would be disciplined. Everything was treated like it was supposed to go back to normal, even though it doesn't seem like it was discussed with Frank, nor did it stop. Reddit user Lily Marlene would offer this advice to the OP. Beyond getting HR to get their shit together, a restraining order might be a good idea. It might be a good idea to make a post in the legal advice subreddit too, for more detail on what sort of action can be taken, since this is outright SA and borderline stalking. Weirdly, my partner is also named Paul, and we've had a similar problem in the past, so reading parts of this was a little surreal. I hope things get better for you both soon. Our OP would post an update 20 minutes after their first post and provided more information on the situation. Thank you to everyone who took time to read my original post and offer suggestions and support. I have received a lot of helpful advice, and I'm so appreciative. There were a few details I left out because of the length, but I tried to answer them in the comments. My husband is still away on his business trip, but will be returning home tonight. Paul does plan to get a new phone number once he returns home. We discussed filing an order of protection. One source of comfort is that we have a PO box, and our street address is not available online. With a restraining order, we would have to disclose our address. We're weighing the pros and cons. My husband and I spoke this morning, and he filled me in on a few new details. His boss called him last night after he sent her screenshots of the text from the VOIP. They have a great working relationship, and she disclosed a few things that she wasn't necessarily supposed to share. Legal was not able to link the VOIP text and calls back to Frank. There have been 2 separate numbers that have been used to harass my husband. Paul used Spokeo to look up the information, and both numbers are owned by the company Envoy. My husband's boss suggested that the next time he receives a phone call from the VOIP number, to answer and to record the conversation. I don't know if he should do that. If anyone knows how to search VOIP numbers so we can connect them to Frank, that would be a huge help. After Frank was placed at his new office last September, he has repeatedly asked to transfer back to my husband's branch. Paul is well regarded within his company and next in line for a promotion. During Frank's training, he would often make comments about how alike they were. Paul thought Frank was referring to their similar background in business. However, I searched online, and Frank may have lied about some of his previous work experience. Physically, personality-wise, and familial background, they are very different. I don't think the harassment is just based on attraction. There have been several messages where Frank calls my husband his friend and mentor, which is bizarre because they only worked together for 5 weeks. There were a few comments about Paul deleting the initial text from Frank. I was also frustrated by his decision, but I understand why. Paul had a rough childhood, and his first instinct is to avoid conflict. The text made him feel so uncomfortable and he didn't want to open his messages and see them. He had hoped that he would forget about what happened. However, the situation escalated. To be clear, those were the only inappropriate texts sent directly from Frank's number. His subsequent messages say things like, "Hey, haven't heard from you in a while. Hey, how's it going?" The texts from the VOIP are explicit. There are similarities in verbiage and format from Frank's texts, Facebook posts, and the VOIP texts. I did do some research on Frank. I searched our state's court dockets and found that he was arrested for DUI a month before he started working for the company. Paul's boss had previously complained that Frank was repeatedly messaging her about when his background check would be completed when he was hired. She thought it was suspicious, but nothing was flagged. At one point during training, Frank texted a coworker from a random number. The coworker asked if it was an alternative contact, and Frank explained that it was his smartwatch. When everything happened, I tried to find as much info as possible. When I googled his primary number, nothing came up. However, the coworker shared the smartwatch number, which is listed online as Frank's primary contact for the past 2 decades. It also shows several numbers attached to Frank's name, and it's noted next to one of them that it is a VoIP. There were previous addresses linked to Frank's phone number. According to one address, a Frank L. Smith and a Frank L. Miller lived at the same residence with the same people. I looked up both of those names, and they have different birth dates within a few years of each other. I was curious because Frank had told my husband that he was divorced, and I thought perhaps he had changed his last name. Frank L. Smith had the same birth date as the court docket I found. The biggest thing my husband's boss told him was that Frank recently asked for an out-of-state transfer, which is currently being processed but not certain. Paul has mixed feelings about this. He first felt relieved, but then frustrated that the company's approach was to make Frank someone else's problem, and it doesn't guarantee that it will stop. After reading this post, I went to the OP's profile to see if there were any more updates, and the very last thing I was able to find that was connected to this situation was this common thread between the OP and a user by the name Hyperdream. It looks like Envoy was merged with IntelliQuint a few years back. It may be a long shot, but they do have a complaint form here for unwanted calls and texts. Thank you. This was extremely helpful. I reported the text, but my husband also plans to call their customer number to see if he can find out more information. It's been over 3 years since the OP made their original post, and I haven't been able to find anything else about their creepy coworker. So hopefully with the advice of Hyperdream, the OP's husband was finally able to block the VoIP numbers and end the harassment. I really hope that Frank stopped this behavior completely, not just for the OP's husband, especially if the company moved him to another city where he could potentially find another victim to harass. And seeing how the OP hasn't given an update about Frank, I think it's safe to say that the nightmare is over, at least for now. This post was uploaded onto the RBI sub on November 10th of 2019. Someone left a scathing handwritten note in my mailbox on Friday night. They brought in my dog who died from cancer, attempted to make me paranoid about the brake pads on my motorcycle, and insulted my family. I have security footage for the police, but I need more. Any additional info will help. In the post, the OP provided this video. Followed by a picture of this envelope. And lastly, a picture of the letter. I'm going to skip over some of the things in this letter because honestly they're pretty racist and gross, but it goes like this. How are you? Haven't seen you in ages. What happened to that gray furry dog you had a few years ago? I see you have a new bike. What type of brake pads do you have on it? Tell your bludgeon grandparents I said hi, would ya? I don't know how you still live at home with such dishonorable grandparents, but props to you, mate. I can visibly see the regret and anger as it burns you on the inside, but you managed to keep it all bottled up within yourself. Your boyfriend has given me the rundown on the heart-wrenching story of you and your struggles with your family, down to the nitty-gritty details. I know you must pray every night, but how do you manage to, when your heart is not pure? Just know one thing, the truth will always hurt, so maybe just go on living your lie, and maybe make your Insta private. You don't want people to know that your clothes, bike, food, and house are taxpayer funded. Just remember that the next time you take a bite of food. That's gotta hurt your manhood, don't it? I guess that's the price to pay for being a thief. How can you claim to be an animal rights activist when you suckle on the taxpayers' teat, taking from the mouths of more deserved humans? I hope life gets better for you. Let me know if you need a hand getting out of your situation. See you at uni, Mr. Big Forehead Smelly Pants. In the comments, the OP gave us more information about what they were experiencing. Hey everyone, first and foremost, I'd like to thank everyone who has taken the time to read, watch, and respond to this post. It's heartwarming to see so much support from strangers. As I write this in Sydney, it's 1:30 a.m., and I just got home from the gym. I was planning to reply to everybody in the morning, but that would be unfair because you've all taken the time to help me out. I'll use this space to answer as many common questions as possible, and then reply individually to any outlying questions in the morning when I have more time. I'm from Sydney, Australia. Both my parents are in their late 50s and not in perfect health. My dad has a lower back injury and hasn't been in the workforce for over 25 years. Mom has always been a stay-at-home mom. Needless to say, they're not in perfect health, and that's why I'm taking this seriously. If it was directed at only me, I could brush it off. But when it indirectly threatens my family, it makes me extremely furious. I have no idea who this person is. My suspicions are that it's a neighbor. My dad received a similar-ish letter about 1.5 years ago, and I'll be getting a copy and comparing the handwriting. The other letter from early last year is 100% from someone on our street. I'm not sure what neighbor it could be, and so I haven't taken the time to speak to any neighbors that I'm not on good terms with. The house directly opposite mine does have security cameras, but doesn't provide any angle which could help us. One thing I noticed is that although it was dark, there were no flashes or lights or any indication of a car waiting or stopping, leading me to believe they traveled on foot. I'm 21 years old and don't have any enemies that I know of. My guess could be that someone is targeting my family based on cultural and/or economic reasons. How they got access to view my Instagram or Facebook, I don't know. My Instagram tag is on my Facebook account, so I'm assuming they have my name. They would have access to my public Instagram. I won't be making it private because the letter alluded to that, and I don't want them to have the satisfaction of thinking I trembled. I also noticed that he's wearing a reflective logo on his shorts. I tried to pause to a frame, but I vaguely see a check, so I'm guessing that it's Nike. The letter was in an envelope signed by a close female friend of mine, so I curiously opened it. Don't think we'd have the possibility of finding fingerprints anymore. The letter alludes to me being unemployed, which is not the case. I study full-time and work part-time. Once again, I can't thank you all enough for your help. It's been invaluable. I read every comment left and I'll be responding to each of you as soon as I can. Peace. A Redditor by the name Death by Ooga Booga would comment this. Those shorts look like Hurley board shorts. Not sure if that's as common a brand in Australia as it is here. The logo is sometimes in the middle of the left leg like that. They're really skinny, white, your age or maybe a little younger. No facial hair, left-handed, and based on where their body comes up on the boot of your car, probably over 6 feet tall. If I had to guess, they legitimately know the person they signed the letter as. That's too personal. So be sure to ask her about it if you trust her. Good luck. Further down, the OP would give us this update. I spoke to a friend's dad who is a police officer. He told me that if I go to the police with little to no leads of who did this, it would be a complaint that would be easily dismissed. He insisted I try my best to find as much information about this guy as I can before speaking to the police to file a report. I'm going to stick around and answer any questions you guys might have. If you suggest that I post this on another subreddit, I'm more than willing to do that. Alternatively, feel free to cross-post if you'd like. I'm using an old account for my safety as the man in the video has attacked my Instagram and Facebook accounts. If you somehow know my main Reddit account, I urge you to please keep it confidential for the safety of my family, my doggo, and myself, as there may be some more information on there that they could use to threaten me. If there's enough interest, or if it's necessary, I'm willing to post a handwritten letter after I've spoken to the police about the best course of action. Thank you to everyone. Obviously, this update was posted before the OP uploaded the picture of the letter, which we have already read for ourselves. Thankfully, the OP left more updates in the comments. This is one of them. Another mini update before I head back to work. I spoke to the police. They weren't much help, as many of you anticipated. They just made an incident report and told us that if anything threatening occurs, to call 000. They refused to give us a copy of the original complaint as it is now an official police document. They referenced some coarse language used. Therefore, no handwriting can be compared, as it would be speculation to assume both incidents are related to each other. As for the boyfriend, I'm a straight male, so I can only assume that the reason for that being written is to insult me childishly. I've been at work most of the day, so I haven't had time to measure the post box. I've looked around the neighborhood and found another home with security cameras and will be approaching them tonight. If you have any direct questions, please leave them under this post so I can answer them directly. I'm not sure what my next course of action should be. I doubt this guy is harmful, and I'm certain that he's doing it simply to incite a negative emotion in me. Hopefully I can get more footage, and we can work together to figure out his motives and where he came from. It'll be some fun. Thank you all once again. Back to work, but I should be able to respond in a few hours. In response to this, a user by the name Surely You Know gave their analysis on the situation. Couple of thoughts here. First, as we already know, this guy is disguising himself as a girl, both with the name and gender stereotypical girly type exclamation points. This person doesn't want you to know that he is a male and taking special care to act like he knows you by naming off a bunch of random stuff he could have just learned off of your social media accounts. You said that you were a straight male, so the writer is attempting to imply that you're gay as an insult. Now, What would motivate a guy you don't know to make himself feel like he is more masculine/manly by implying that you're gay? Here's my theory. This person is petty, insecure, passive-aggressive, feels emasculated, and upset with you but doesn't have the balls to confront you. I think this person is pulling info from social media and from someone that connects you to him, a female, likely a female friend of the name he signed on the envelope and letter. I think the letter writer is immature for his age, socially awkward, not in college, and probably doesn't know you and your family in any real way. They're going very far out of their way to make you feel like they know all this stuff about you and your family members. And I think the things they know the least about you, they're likely to put more emphasis on, because their intent is to convince you that they really do know these personal details about you. Why would someone who is vaguely threatening you want to out themselves by leaving so many clues, so you could figure out who they are? No way. They are trying to scare you, but they are vague and emasculated, unconfident and scared. So they are trying to throw you off. Assume that what is true is the opposite of what they are trying to convince you of. I think this is a male who is, was, or wants to be romantically involved with a female friend of yours. There is something this person is jealous about, hence their focus on trying to reduce you and make you feel less than. Their internal motivation would be driven by jealousy, envy, and anger about something you have that they don't. A close female friend that they think you are blocking their chances with? This person likely has some tendencies of stalking and obsessing about females who give them the slightest bit of attention. He becomes infatuated and wants what he cannot have. He is unlikely violent at this point. He is too scared to threaten you or say anything that could get him in major trouble. Try to think of a female friend that you have that is super nice and easygoing. She may or may not have noticed a male in her life that she considers totally in the friend zone, that is a bit too attentive, eager to please and hang out, wanting more of her time, and dejected when she is busy. It may be someone like a female friend or ex of yours, one that talks about you in passing, or just that you come up a lot in conversations because you're close. Sorry for the length. Just think of motivation to do this. What type of guy does this? What is his goal? Why would any male be jealous or irritated with you? And why are they listing so many personal details to try to convince you that they are close to you? Probably because they aren't. And either they want to be close to you, or they're jealous of you, because you hold or have something that they want, cannot have not been able to attain, or don't know how to. That's something that they get butthurt about, in my opinion, is likely to be a platonic friend, girlfriend, ex, or crush. After reading this analysis, I actually have to agree. In my experience, people who say racist things and attempt to use the word gay as an insult are typically very insecure, and that same insecurity forces them to act out, desperately trying to feel better about themselves. But thankfully, it looks like our OP is not insecure. Any updates, OP? Hey, I appreciate your ongoing support. We've given up on spending any further time on this. As much as we'd like to find out who wrote this, it just wouldn't be worth it. I'm suspecting it was the neighbor down the street. Nothing has happened since then, but if it does, I'll be sure to let the family at RBI know. And that was that. While the story might not be completely resolved, at least the OP has moved on, and nothing else has happened to them or their family. I want to give a special shout out to our Cold Crew members. You can become one too by clicking the first link in the description. If you made it this far, leave a like, and as always, thanks for watching.